Welcome to episode 319 of the DFO Rundown, brought to you by Bet365. Of course, they are the largest sports betting platform globally. You can open an account at Bet365 and use the promo code DAILY365 to bet on a huge range of markets. Of course, baseball is ongoing. You got the summer games. A lot is happening right now in the world of sports. Check it out at Bet365. I'm Jason Gregor as we welcome in Frank Saravalli. Frankie, how you doing? It's been a few weeks.
I know. Been way too long. Good. Just relaxing, trying to put the phone down, stay in touch with people a little bit here and there, but always nice to disconnect for a bit, spend time with the kids, the wife, and hang out by the pool.
Are you an Olympic watcher?
I am actually. I find it hard at night in prime time because all the events have already happened, but I have been tuning in live during the day. It's kind of nice at like lunchtime, throw on the tube and see what's happening live, especially if you get like any of the medal competitions. I don't care what it is, if it's badminton or if it's table tennis, if there's a gold medal on the line, I'm in.
Dude, I was watching fencing the other day. I don't think I've ever
Did you see that guy hopping like the Energizer Bunny?
No, I didn't see that one. I was watching Canada's first ever fencing medal. So that was, to me, sports that I don't really watch. And honestly, like I've tried to read up on fencing. Like I understand how, I just don't know how they calculate the points. Like watching, I'm like, oh, is that one? Like, so, but I still like it. Like I'm watching, you can kind of, you get a pretty good tutorial from the announcers on what's going on. I understand the basics, but far from an expert. So to me, I just more so I'm like sitting there waiting. Oh, who's winning? Okay, great. Like it's kind of fun sometimes to not be overly knowledgeable in something. You're just cheering just for a positive outcome.
You know what's been awesome is, and your son is the same age as mine, like having them come in and watch a sport that they've never seen before, handball, yes, or whatever it is. Like we sat there last night and watched badminton for a while. We watched beach volleyball, and he's like, "Dad, this isn't on a beach." And I'm like, "Dude, the beach is wherever you make it. Find your beach."
It's not on a beach. Well, it's funny because my son, we have a few pools here. There's the Kinsman pool, which hosted like university and other events. Like it's got massive platforms. And so he went off the 5-meter one. He's 10 the other day. And then there's the 10-meter one, which is way up there. So I'm trying to convince him. I think there's a 7.5 in between that the pool has 4 of them. So our goal is eventually he's got to jump off the one. So we're watching diving.
Can you do the 10-meter?
Oh yeah, I've done it. Yeah.
Dude, that's legit.
Dude, I haven't done it in a long time, but I had to show him, of course, like it's one of those things where in hindsight, I was like, God, as I got up there, I'm like, well, now I'm pot committed. Cause I was telling him, something, you just get up there, don't look down, just go off. And so I walk up there, he's standing on the edge of the pool watching, take 2 steps back, boom, I go off. And I'm just like, oh my God, my guts in my throat as I'm falling down there. And I'm like, just don't show him you're scared. Once you land, you're fine. And he's like, how was it? I'm like, well, I haven't been on that in a while. It's a little nervous, but it's exciting nervous. So he said, I think I did it when I was 12 or 13. So we're building it up to it. But he was eventually running off the 5-meter one. So that was pretty good. But he's watching the diving and he's kind of like, God, guys dive off of that. We just jump off. I'm like, well, yeah, but they practice a lot.
Right.
So, it's crazy.
Man, think about how skinny I would be walking up those steps every time to dive.
Buddy, it's true. It's true. Yeah, being on the no sugar July for the kid over here. I needed to lose a little bit around my I'm a big believer in you measure around your belly button for health. I don't worry about weight as much as that. And so I'm down 1.5 inches. So I got about 1 inch to go. So
if that's the case, I've got about 8 inches to go.
Wow. Got to start somewhere. I didn't like it. So I noticed myself in a pair of shorts. I'm like, that's got to stop. So you know what it was though? The Stanley Cup Finals, man. Every game I went to, I got a sugar sweet tooth, and you saw that whole display of candy. It's just like it's the worst. So I'm just
you only did the home games, bud.
Oh, it's the worst. So yeah, so I was like, I'm done. So it's nice, but you know what? The Olympic athletes, we think about you cover the Stanley Cup every year, right? And so and there's only 2 teams that get to it, but everybody 16 get to the playoffs. Like the Olympic athletes, man, it's like a 4-year run. I know there's the World Championships for their sports, but Olympics is just a different level. And that's what I love about it. I'm like, God, the people that win must be just so, I don't care. Even just get a podium to put in all that work. And
the emotion is what makes it.
Oh, like what about finishing fourth? Like I couldn't.
There was a swimmer from the US who finished fourth by 1/100th of a second 4 years ago, and she won the gold medal last night.
Yeah.
And it was like, that is unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that would be the absolute worst. So we'll see. Hey, there's been lots going on in the hockey world since we chatted. Why don't we start in Philadelphia? Michkov is coming over maybe earlier than people expected. And then they signed Travis Konecny to a whopper of a contract, 8 years at 8.75. How's that going over in Philly?
Well, everyone's excited everywhere I've been. Anytime I run into a casual hockey fan, they say, how is this guy? Is he the real deal? Everyone wants to know the answer. I don't have the answer, but everyone's excited. Matvei Michkov throwing out the first pitch tonight at the Phillies-Yankees game, Monday, July 29th. So that's pretty awesome. He's in town. The Flyers are thrilled. I can't remember ever seeing a team where both the GM and the president of hockey operations, Danny Briere and Keith Jones, go to JFK Airport in New York to wait for him to get off of his flight. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that, but that gives you some indication of how excited they are. Look, I've talked to people whose scouting eye I trust. They think maybe a close comparable in terms of style of game and maybe potential impact at some point down the line is Kirill Kaprizov, which is a pretty unbelievable piece to add to your lineup. But the difference between Michkov and Kaprizov is Kaprizov came over quite a few years later. He was 25, I think, by the time he got here. And that's what the Flyers thought they might have to wait for, was a long time to get this guy in their lineup. And now he's here. Now they get to develop him hands-on, and that part is super exciting. But they've been really quick to temper expectations to say, this guy's not a savior. He's not someone that can put this team on his back at this age and carry this team right to contending. Now, that is a great segue to what I think is the key all-important question when it comes to Travis Konecny. Where do you think this team is at in their competitive window, competitive cycle? You could make the argument that their competitive cycle is just beginning. It's probably even a little bit of a head start compared to where they thought they would be, given that they thought Michkov was going to be a few years later down the line. Wherever you think they are, Travis Konecny fitting in at 1 year away from free agency and then for the next 8 years is a really big commitment to make to a guy that I think has kind of reached his ceiling in the NHL. Agree or disagree?
100%. Like I'm curious why they felt the need to pay him. I don't like 8 years for anybody who's non-elite. I've said that, so I'm not picking on him specific. I don't think it's good for the players of the league. But like his career high is 33 goals and 68 points. He's had 61 points. Other than that, he's a really good player. I like Travis Konecny as a player, but at 8.75, it seemed like I don't think anybody was going to give him that on the open market. So I understand that you want to re-sign your guys, but I thought like if he would have got 7.75, I still think, because, Frank, if we go off that adage of, a mil for every 10 points, he's a significantly higher like ceiling for him to get value on that deal. He's got to become close to an 80-point player, right? Like I know he kills penalties and he had an unreal shorthanded season last year, 6 goals. And it's really back-to-back years. He's had 13 points shorthanded. So that's great, but it's going to be hard to match 6 shorthanded goals when you had a 25% shooting percentage on shorthanded, 6 goals and 24 shots. Like it's going to be difficult. So I could see him being a 70-point guy, 68, but that's not really close to an 8.75. And the final few years of that deal, like if we look at his peak years, what's the final few years of that deal going to look like?
Yeah. I think I'm struggling with this one. I know the cap is increasing, but I guess what I would say is it's hard, to your point, to find value even in the first couple years.
Mm-hmm.
And when that's the case, I think it's just a difficult. I think the Flyers felt like they were between a rock and a hard place. They had a guy that really wanted to be there. They feel as a heart and soul player and really important to their organization. But when Travis Konecny is done playing, he's going to be $106 million player.
Good for him.
I mean, it's unbelievable for him. Like, everyone's happy for him. I get it. I guess my thing would be, what is Travis Konecny's ceiling? And the guy that I keep coming back to, like, I think his closest comparable is Brendan Gallagher. He's Brendan Gallagher with a bit of a higher ceiling, meaning he has more production. Now, the difficulty, and Brendan Gallagher's deal was 6 years times 6.5. He signed that in 2020. The first, maybe the first couple years, I guess, were fine. Even then, look, he's really struggled with injury, but I think he's also the case. Brendan Gallagher is the perfect comp, because when you have a guy of that size that plays that style of game, their bodies tend to really not hold up all that well over the long haul. And you look at Brendan Gallagher, maybe 875 is the $100 million cap comparable to Gallagher's 6.5. And maybe you're not squinting that hard when the cap in year 8 is 130 million or 140 million. 8.5 maybe isn't that big of a deal. But nonetheless, I think in the short term, it's hard to look at it and find value right now for the Flyers to then pull a step back and say, well, how close is this team to competing? And the alternative to this, and I mentioned the rock and the hard place, would have been to trade Travis Konecny. Like, they still could have gone through this season in the final year of his deal and gotten unbelievable value for him at the deadline.
Mm-hmm.
They could have traded him a year ago and gotten even more. It's a tough spot. I think the Flyers probably they're thrilled to get him done. I think it's an expensive deal for them that doesn't have very much upside.
Yeah, I would agree with. I think that's fair. Like, he'll add a lot of personality and all those things that sometimes you can't put value on. But I think it'll be a tough one. He's another example for me anyway of why the NHL should strongly look at limiting the length of deals after the age of 28 years of age. So that's just me. I'm not sure they'll ever do it, but there's lots of numbers we can study as to why it's beneficial for both sides. But I get the excitement for Michkov. To me, I'm very interested. He turns 20 in December, Frank. The longer you wait to come to the NHL, for the vast majority of players, I think it's going to help you. I like to use Draisaitl as an example. He couldn't play in the NHL as a teenager. And when he came in at 20, then he's a 50-point player. And we've seen what happened later. Like, there's, the rushing of teenagers doesn't need to happen at all. And, Michkov with the late birthday, he turns 20 in December. It's going to be an adjustment, but I think he'll add a lot of excitement to that organization. Like, he's a dynamic player, and I know he's kind of short in stature, but he's pretty thick. And I'm really intrigued to see him in the NHL. I try to temper expectations early, but his skill set, I think in a few years in Philly, they're going to be really happy with this.
So all of that said, what are the Flyers?
I think they're a competitive team, Frank. Like, in the East, I think the Flyers could be what they were last year again and be right around there, but ultimately not get in, right? Like, New Jersey's improved this season. Washington made it, and they've improved their team. So, I think Philly's, and then you got all those other teams, Buffalo and Detroit and Ottawa, who are all trying to hope to get in. I think Philly's kind of in that mix. I think there's going to be a lot of teams battling for the 2 wildcard spots, but not necessarily with a high point total.
Yeah, I see the Flyers right in that mix too. They need a big year from Jamie Drysdale. Their goaltending seems to have settled down a bit with Fedotov and Evason. And they're a team that is going to compete, and it's going to work its ass off for John Tortorella. Do they have enough guns to get in?
They got to get lucky. I'll say that they got to stay healthy, and they got a lot of things going right for them for sure. Will have to be. Now, what about the other team in the East that I thought last year no one expected them to be that bad? I'm not sure people thought they'd be a lock playoff team, but the Columbus Blue Jackets, from the start of it, once they, the coaching debacle, just that everything seemed to get off the rails there. Dean Evason comes in, a fiery guy, much more of, I think, a player's coach. What do you make of that hire? The final coach for the upcoming season.
Absolutely love it. I think this is a fantastic hire. You look at the work that Dean Evason did in Minnesota, it was top notch. I mean, we talked a long time last year about Jay Woodcroft and his record and him essentially, paying for a poor start. Go look at Dean Evason's record in Mini. It's right on par. They're within a couple points percentages of each other, a couple hundredths of a points percentage. He was that successful in Mini, and for whatever reason, they hit a downturn and couldn't shake out of it and had to make a move. I think the passion that he brings is so evident. He's an easy guy to play for in that sense. He's detailed, and he reminds me of someone that's always prepared for whatever could happen. So nice to see him back. I think he more than deserved another chance. And there's a lot of work to do with this Columbus team. And the first thing is going to be giving everyone a blank slate to show themselves, because they've got a lot of important young pieces that, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was club mandate, if it was Pascal Vincent and a lack of patience. I don't know what they were thinking last year in Columbus, but the way that they toyed with top end prospects, trying to ask too much of them,
Yes.
and then discarding them when they couldn't do it, losing trust in them, that was hugely problematic for their season last year. And it made their organization, there was a lot of people talking behind the scenes about it being a very unfriendly place for players.
Yeah. There's so much dysfunction and kind of confused messages, mixed messages, and what they were doing, is especially once they were out of it early on. I'm like, that's a time where you're patient and you play your young guys and let them gain some experience. And who cares if you lose the games? It probably helps you because then you get a higher pick anyway. So yeah, I didn't understand kind of what direction they were going in, and we'll see how it changes now, both from the GM and head coaching positions now, right? You have a whole different slot from there. So we've talked about players signings, talked about a coach signing. Now, of course, there's the GM signing of Stan Bowman in Edmonton. Frank, you'd reported earlier in July that obviously they were interested in him, and lo and behold, that came to fruition.
Yeah. Look, this is a guy I think that the organization has long had interest in. I think even going back to Jeff Jackson's hiring last year, had Stan Bowman been eligible, I think he would have been a candidate for the CEO of Hockey Ops position then. He was suspended for another year, and I saw all the reaction on social media that this was a deeply unpopular hiring it's seemingly in the Edmonton market. What I would say is, look, everyone deserves a second chance. And the most simple way that I can boil the Stan Bowman situation down is this. One, he was suspended and did the time. Two, he took ownership of the situation, even though this is my own personal opinion. There were a lot of other people ahead of him in the pecking order of the Chicago Blackhawks that had let him down. And when you see and hear the stories, you're often not getting the full explanation, which he's not going to make excuses for. But the first time that Stan Bowman heard the gruesome allegations that were made was when he read them in the Jenner and Block report. He wasn't, you'd have to put yourself in his shoes. He wasn't told the things that a lot of people believe he was told and then actively moved to cover it up. That's neither here nor there. He's taken ownership, said he should have done more and could have done more. So he's suspended, did the time, took ownership of it, did the authentic work behind the scenes with Sheldon Kennedy and the Respect Group, near full-time work over the last couple years, implementing curriculum and visiting junior hockey teams around the continent. And then the fourth, and I think key part of this, is he also got in touch with and formed a relationship with the victim in Kyle Beach. When you take all four of those things and you consider them, this was not the guy that did the abusing. He's not the perpetrator here. And then did all of these other things, including taking ownership of a situation that really, I think, got out of hand. Like, why doesn't Stan Bowman deserve the ability to work again in the National Hockey League? I don't understand the backlash of it.
I have no issue with the second chance. I was on record as saying, for Edmonton, to me, if you had all 32 GM jobs available today, Edmonton might be, if it's not the top of the list, it's definitely top 3 for best GM jobs around. And so, you kind of come back in a great situation, fine. To me, my evaluation of Bowman, as much as it'll be about hockey, will be about now he's in a position. So you talked about all these things that he did, which is very good. I don't discount that for a sec. He obviously wanted to educate himself on it and understand more and be better and help others, which is awesome. That's when you're just Stan Bowman. Now you're Stan Bowman, general manager of the Edmonton Oilers. You're in a position to influence more, to discuss a topic that way too many people, not only in hockey, but in society, are uncomfortable with, they don't want to talk about, and not all the levels. It's not just sexual abuse, harassment, bullying, all that stuff, hazing still, which every now and then there's a few idiots that allow it. But to me, I want to see how he uses this platform to continue to further that cause. And to me, that'll be just as important. And Sheldon Kennedy even said it when I had him on my show. He goes, hey, you know what? Now you got to walk the walk. And so you can talk about all wanting to help it and everything when you're there. And I think people confuse, well, he's a GM now. His whole focus should be hockey. Really? Are you telling me? I'm not asking him to do it full time like he did before. When you're in a position of a GM, it could be 2 hours a month, 3 hours a month. It doesn't have to be this monumental time. And really, you could even say, hey, you know what? From July or August until December, January, we can do more. And then as we get closer to the trade deadline, maybe we really got to ratchet down and have less of focused on anything else. That's fine to me. I don't really care. Figure it out, have the hours, and allocate it properly so you are a vocal and consistent supporter. And I think somebody who is going to constantly be reminding people of the atrocities of sexual abuse, the long-term damage of it, and how we avoid it, and have the uncomfortable conversations that, Frank, like I sometimes I get really upset when I hear, oh, hockey culture. Shut up with hockey culture. Like this isn't a societal problem. Okay. All you got to do is look at the statistics. 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused. The vast majority, sadly, come from in their own home, from a caregiver, from somebody who is in a position of, coaching, whether it's teachers. There's lots of different things around, unfortunately, and where it happens. So this is not just a hockey situation, but they have the opportunity now for having hockey to lead it and say, we're not going to be scared to talk about it and focus on it. And I think that has to be how I'm going to evaluate Stan Bowman, as much on that as I am on the moves and trades and signings he makes.
You have to also give him a chance to do it, though.
Yeah, I totally agree.
But that's the other thing, is everyone wants to just lock him up and throw away the key. This wasn't the guy that did the abusing.
Agreed.
And I don't think this was the guy that was actively moving to try and brush this aside. When you're given really limited information and, something weird may have happened between Brad Aldrich and a player, and then your CEO, your boss, you're newly into your role as GM, your CEO, John McDonough, says, hey, don't worry, I got this. I'm sorry. Like, this is not the guy that should be in handcuffs. He served, I think, a significant enough punishment, sitting aside for 3 years with the inability to work in the NHL. To say that he didn't, I don't know how you could argue otherwise. He paid a stiff penalty. He's paid a bigger punishment than the guy that actually did the abusing.
Fair point. And the original point, Frank, about the actual details. So a friend of mine's a psychologist who works with a lot of people who have suffered real trauma in their life. And he says, and that's his job. They're in like a comfortable position. He goes, you know how many meetings and sessions he has to have before these people really start to discuss exactly what happened? So if Kyle Beach came to them and said, do we know in what detail and how severe they told everything that first time? I have no idea.
That's what they only had one meeting about it, and that's all that was said.
Yeah.
That's literally all that was said was, hey, something weird may have happened.
Yeah.
How do you know to act more? His error was in omission, in not asking more questions, in not probing more to find out.
Yeah, but he's talking about that. And that to me,
that's what I'm saying. He's taken ownership of that. It's not like he's brushing that aside saying, oh yeah, well, even for something as innocuous as the way I just framed it, which is, I believe, how it was framed to him, he's said point blank, I wasn't good enough. Yeah. It's not like he's sitting here saying, he's not giving all the excuses of, this wasn't my fault. Whatever. He said, I could have done more.
Yeah. And
what more do you want from the guy?
Yeah. Well, to me, actions will speak louder than words moving forward, but I don't need the actions to be instant, but they need to be noticeable at some point in the next year.
Okay. I'm confident in knowing Stan Bowman that you'll see that in that market.
Yeah. And you know what? Then it could turn out to be a huge positive, because it is a conversation that way too many of us don't want to have. Right? It's ugly. People don't like it. It's like the laws have changed. It's not rape anymore, Frank. It's sexual assault. Why? Because rape was too graphic and people didn't want to know that. I'm like, what? So now we're going to try to minimize it even more. That's our problem. So if this is a way to somehow, in a small sense, start the conversation more, it could turn out to be a big benefit.
Well,
but we'll have to see.
And look, it's not up for me to judge, by the way. When Kyle Beach, the victim, was then part of the training and curriculum that Stan Bowman helped write, and then gives his blessing to the Edmonton Oilers, doesn't really matter what I say or you say. He's the victim. He's formed a relationship with Stan Bowman now to see him do the work. That's good enough for me.
No, to me, though, the bigger issue here was the Blackhawks, not Bowman, but the Blackhawks silence on Brad Ulrich. And that allowed him to he ended up, abusing the 16-year-old boy at Houghton High School, went to jail for 9 months. And, even Miami, where there was 2 allegations against him, it's the destructive silence that is the big issue here. And all of us, because it's a societal thing, need to be willing to stand up and talk about it more often. And that to me is the biggest example of where we can learn from this, is the destructive silence.
Well said.
Now let's bring in. Sorry, Ty, that's not the smoothest transition, but we'll bring in Tyler.
He's the palate cleanser
for fill in the blanks now.
Yeah, I think I can come in and lighten things up a little bit here. But anyways, great conversation, guys. Today's edition of Fill in the Blank is brought to you by our friends at Bet365, where you can sign up using the promo code DAILY365. Couple of hockey things I want to get into here in Fill in the Blank. One thing that's been surprising throughout the whole summer is the lack of trade activity. So let me start with this. The name you're most surprised hasn't gotten traded so far is blank, Frank.
Marty Necas.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about him on the back end of this. I think there were a couple, I guess I could share now. I think there were a couple deals that had been offered, that were considered, that ultimately just weren't enough for the Carolina Hurricanes. And I think at this point, it's probably fair to say that he's going to end up being going through the ARB process and remaining a Carolina Hurricane for one more year. But two teams I can tell you, I believe so there were two things that happened. Draft week, I believe the Buffalo Sabres had a deal in place with Carolina to trade for Marty Necas. I think it was Buffalo. There was one team for sure. They had a trade agreed to, and Necas would not agree to sign a new deal with that new team. And that ended up scuttling the trade. There was another deal, I think, on the table. I don't know how seriously Carolina considered it, but I believe it was Winnipeg. And I think Winnipeg offered
Ehlers?
Nope. I think they offered Rutger McGroarty, Cole Perfetti, and some pick. I think it was some combination, if I have that correct. Perfetti, McGroarty, and a pick from Marty Necas. And either that wasn't getting it done either. Either didn't get it done or that wasn't a place he was going to sign. So it's been, needless to say, it's been challenging for the Hurricanes to get something done with Necas.
Greg's, is there another name you're surprised hasn't gone anywhere?
Well, we'd heard lots of rumblings for a few months. I thought Nikolai Ehlers might go. So that would have been the guy. I thought there was, you know what, still a good player, can add a lot. So he was the guy that I thought might go. And then I guess second might be would be Gustafsson in Minnesota. But when you look at their combined him and Fleury, like they don't have that high of a cap hit between the two of them. And Wallsted's a young guy. So maybe Bill Guerin's going to be like, hey, I want to make sure that, I'd rather not trade away a goalie, because the truth is rarely do you get great value for goalies in return. So maybe that's why he's going to be ultra patient.
Fair enough. Second one I got for you guys is about one of the names who was in the top 10 of Frank's trade targets around the draft and free agency, but it's Patrick Laine. There was some news a couple of weeks ago, I guess, that, he's through the NHL player assistance program. So that means, teams can talk to him. They can look at moving him. The best landing spot for Laine, or one team that should be interested, is blank, Jason.
Oh. Well, it's funny that you say that, because Laine says, you know what, he kind of wants out. So if he really wants out and wants a fresh start, and so I talked to people at the NHL, and if they mutually agreed, he could terminate the contract, then he could go sign somewhere, and they could do that if he really wanted out, because the Blue Jackets here are like, okay, we have a player who wants out and he's not performing well. So now we got to do right by the player, and we're going to have to eat half his salary for the remaining of the term. Like, it's not a great deal for them. So I'm not sure I find it. I see a team right now. Now, if you can get him at $4 million, then I guess maybe it's worth the risk. But so I guess I'd probably go like a bottom feeder team that's going to give him lots of opportunities. So I would go with Anaheim maybe. We thought they would make some moves in the offseason. They really didn't. So that would be it. But I like right now, like he's a real hard guy to trade, because you don't know what you're getting. And, you're probably like, maybe you don't have to give up anything. But if you're a Columbus, I'm like, God, I'm really going to get bent over here and just get crushed on this deal, because I'm dealing from such a position of weakness.
Yeah, but he also hasn't really shown much value either.
No, that's my point. I agree. Like,
what are you hinging you're saying, well, we're losing a lot, we're giving up a lot. It was a previous regime. I think you wash your hands of it and take whatever you can get.
What about a mutual? Well, Laine probably wouldn't agree to it, but like, to me, if Laine really wants out, then mutually agree to part ways, terminate the contract.
Yeah. I don't know. I wouldn't walk from that much money. I mean,
well,
easy for you to say, big dog.
No, but it's easy to say, trade me, Frank. And it's sometimes I feel like the player, do they look in the mirror and be like, well, yeah, to trade you don't have any value right now. And so, yeah, the team signed you. And yes, it wasn't Don Waddell who did it, but it's now his problem. And it's a big problem.
So he's been paid a $2 million signing bonus, and he is owed $16.2 million left.
Yeah.
If my math is right. 17.2.
And then just look at the cap hit, right? Like,
$16.2 million in real cash. Why would you terminate? You might never get that money back. It'd be different if you're Kuznetsov, who terminated to go to Russia, where he signed a 4-year deal for reportedly $24 million. That's a different story. If you're walking away from 8 or 6 to get 24, I understand it. But Laine, I don't see why that would make much sense for him. Why? Like, to me, if I'm a team in contender mode and I've got some cap space, that's a player I'd go after. See if you can get Columbus to retain. Why wouldn't Carolina make sense? They've got cap space. They lost a bunch of players.
Yeah.
Maybe try and rehab him like they wanted to do with Kuznetsov, and that didn't work. They don't have the cap space, but what about a team like the New York Rangers? I could see him fitting in on the right side. That would make a ton of sense to me.
Do you think the deal is more likely, Frank? Maybe Laine comes back, and if you're Columbus, say, yeah, we'll trade you, but everybody's got to see you play. Play 20 games.
Well, I think the shoulder has been less talked about than the mental stuff. Like, he's still recovering from the shoulder surgery that he had. They described it as a minor cleanup, but that was like when Don Waddell took over in May. That's not a minor cleanup if he's still recovering from it in July. So I'd be real concerned about the shoulder too. Like, there's a reason why he only played, what was it, 18 games?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, no, 100%. To me, there's this trade. If it happens before training camp, wow, good for them. But if I was a team, even if I knew I was going to get him at half price, Frank, which is like what, 4.35 million, I would say, why not wait? Hey, let's see you play 20 games and see if you're like, okay.
I've seen a lot of people talk about the Montreal Canadiens and Patrick Laine, but I look at them and I'm like, do they really need another shooter?
Well, they need someone with size, that's for sure.
Slavkovsky.
I like him.
Yeah. He's a big boy. All right. Last one I got for you guys. And I will give you an out for this one because it's just something I was thinking of this morning and I couldn't come up with an answer myself. But we've seen so many coaching changes over the last really 12, 13 months now that it's hard to find a coach who's on the hot seat. So if you need to answer no one, maybe that is the right answer to this. But blank is on the hottest seat heading into next season, Frank. It's interesting because so many of the teams who have like high expectations coming into the year or teams with pressure on them, they've hired a new coach in the last like 6 months. So it's like, even if the first 3 months go bad, it's not like they're going to gas anybody, right?
I will say Derek Lalonde is on the hot seat.
Ooh, that's actually a good one.
I just think the Red Wings are facing real pressure in general. Like, I think they know they need to turn the corner. And look at the bump that the Washington Capitals got from Spencer Carberry last year. The Vancouver Canucks got from Rick Tocchet. The Nashville Predators got in with Andrew Brunette. Like, they've got to make some hay. I know he was only there for 1 season, but I think there's been some real... I don't know if discord is the right word, but there has been some friction between Greg Cronin and I think some of the Anaheim Ducks players. So he would be a name I would watch. And look, we've seen some drastic moves from the Tampa Bay Lightning this summer, including Steven Stamkos. At some point, you would think that John Cooper may be on the hot seat. I'm not predicting that by any stretch. I think he's one of the very best coaches in the league, the top 5 if you were looking at that list. But I don't think Julien Brisebois is afraid to do anything. And if they continue to sort of linger in a malaise, I wouldn't be floored if that were the case or the outcome.
Well, the most laughable stat about the coaches is that Chris Knobloch, who's coached 69 games, is now 20th in most games coached by an NHL coach at 69 with his current team. So
that's wild.
Like, Since he was hired November 12th, a third of the league has made changes since then. It's nuts. But I'm going to go off the board. And I'm going to say Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh. I think I don't think there's anybody with a real hot seat, but I don't know, just something. Him and Dubas, if Pittsburgh gets off to a slow start, I could see some weird thing going on there. And trust me, I think he gets scooped up in a heartbeat. But there just seems to be, lots of different guys coming in there that makes me say, because what is he, second longest tenured coach, and he's been a great coach. Like you can't argue about his success rate. But I don't know. That's just he would be the guy because Lalonde would have been my number one with Frank for sure. I think he's number one, but I guess I'll go with Pittsburgh because there doesn't seem like a lot that are rational. So I probably have to go a little irrational on this.
Yeah, that's fair. Lalonde is probably a pretty good answer with the expectations in Detroit. That is a wrap, gentlemen, on this week's edition of Fill in the Blank, brought to you by Bet365.
All right. Now we talked about Patrick Laine, Frank, and you just kind of where that you mentioned the shoulder. He finally got cleared last week, so he's out of the NHL and NHLPA program, and that's good news for him. And I'm kind of curious to see, what he's got as a player. Like he's still really young. I think he's only drafted in 2016. It's just he seems like he's been around a lot longer than that.
Yeah. He's such a talented guy, and we've seen him at his very best. I think at times he's been his own worst enemy, and which is probably a big part of the reason why he decided to seek some assistance in the player assistance program. He talked openly about his struggles with mental health, and I think that's been another really important conversation to have. I hope he's at his best, because when he's on and he's healthy and he's focused, he's as lethal of a goal scorer as there is in the NHL. And when he burst onto the scene in Winnipeg, I mean, there was no one that really dominated the headlines quite like him for a short period of time. And we'd love to see him get back to that point. It's just a long way from here to there.
Yeah, I know that's fair. I'm because he's such a dynamic shooter and scorer. I hope he can be healthy physically and mentally, because I still think he can be a difference maker. And Carolina is an interesting name, Frank, because you mentioned it's basically 3.9 for Kuznetsov, right? That they free up, and if they got him at half, it's 4.35. And he has 1 year remaining after this season, so 2 years left basically. So that's an interesting one to consider. They haven't been afraid to look at guys like that, and if Laine can play well at 4.35, he could be a real bargain for you.
Yeah, he could. And the term is not interminable. I mean, Kuznetsov was traded at almost as high an AAV. The Caps, by the way, that ended up being a tremendous deal for Brian McClellan on the way out. Well, not the way out, but on the way up, I should say. They get a third round pick for a guy that ultimately ended up being of no cap consequence to them this year. And he ends up moving on anyway. It was a tremendous piece of business by the Caps.
Now, speaking of the Canes, Marty Necas is probably the biggest storyline we have here coming up in the next few weeks on what his contract potentially is going to be, and other trades. What are you hearing? What do you think the numbers that he'll be asking for?
I have no idea what is that. If I were to ballpark it, my guess would be that he asks for $8 million a year. The Canes come in at $5 million, and somehow the arbitrator renders a decision that meets in the middle. That's sort of in the ballpark. They might even ask for a little more than that, touch more, 8.5. I don't know, something in that range. If I were to guess, I have no idea what their actual asks are, but that's what I would think it would be.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like Travis Konecny just got 8.875. Now, granted, 1 year away from free agency, so that plays a small factor into it. And if you look at his last 2 years, he had 129 points. Marty Necas had 124. Now he had slightly fewer goals in in 62 to the 52 to the 64 of Konecny. But if he's 8.75, your 8 million number, Frank, kind of falls right in there. Now that's only one comparable. You can't always use the high.
You can't even use that comparable because it buys UFA years.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But Necas is what, 1 year away from free agency? Or is he 2?
Man, doing this on the fly.
Yeah.
He is.
I have to look. Because he's played what, 5 full years for them? 6 though.
I think he's 2 years away.
I think he's 2. Because I
I
thought he
don't
said
know.
like
I'd have
6.
to look at it.
Yeah. So either way, he's you're right. Like he's going to command a pretty big number. I would think. And like I don't need, like, Marty Necas is a good player. I'm not sure how good he is. What do you think?
I think he could be a game breaker. I
Okay.
think he's got speed that's elite of the elite. He's already got a 71-point season under his belt. I think he's really, really good.
Yeah. He has I guess Puckpedia says he has 2 years, this year and next season. And then he's a UFA. So had the extra bonus year. All right. Well, it'll be fun. Frankie, enjoy the Olympics. Oh, also one other one, the Torrey Krug situation in St. Louis. I know there was lots of talk that maybe they're a team that might move one of their defensemen. Well, unfortunately, Krug, Armstrong said it, that he's going to get reevaluated here probably about a month from now. And if it doesn't heal, then he's going to require surgery. He's out for the whole season.
Yeah, I've truly never seen a diagnosis like that. Pre-arthritic changes in his left ankle.
Yeah, it's weird.
The team said it was a cumulative result of a bone fracture suffered earlier in his career. Trying to do non-surgical interventions over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks. After that time, will be reevaluated to determine whether surgery will be necessary. Out indefinitely, and if surgery is required, be out the entirety of the 24-25 season. And I would say, in parentheses, if he has surgery, there's a chance maybe we don't see him play again. So,
yikes. That's never good. So
that seemed like that press release was worded like it seemed like, hey, this might be the beginning of the end.
Yeah. And on one other team, Frank, that to me probably has the biggest question marks right now, the Colorado Avalanche in Landeskog and Nichushkin. And how well can Landeskog play? We've never really seen this before. Like, I really hope for his sake and all the work and rehab he's done for 2 years, he can come back and he can play and stay playing.
Well, we have seen this, and recently Sean Couturier did it. He missed 2 seasons.
But he played a little bit. He didn't miss 2 full years, did he not?
I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's mostly the same exact thing. He played.
Because he played 29 games in 21-22, and then he was out for all of that season and then the next year after. So a little bit more, but like I hope for Landeskog, now different injury, but I hope for Landeskog's case that he's able to come back and play. Would just kind of show you the patience needed sometimes to rehab an injury properly.
The thought process is that Landeskog will be ready to go for game 1.
Yeah.
Opening night, or if not very close. So that's the game plan, I think, at this exact period in time. And then Nichushkin, I believe, is eligible to come back or must be activated November 15th.
Yeah. So it's they're kind of a fascinating team to watch, to see where they're at cap wise and everything else. So that they're another team to kind of just have a side eye watching to see what's going to happen with them.
Do you know who I'm low key, like we talked about Matvei Michkov? I might be more excited to see Cal Ritchie than I am Matvei Michkov.
Really?
Cal Ritchie, really?
That's your guy?
Really good. Write it down now. Cal Ritchie, Calder Trophy candidate this season.
Ooh. All right. July 29th, little Calder conversation. Frank, enjoy your summer. I think we'll talk to you once in August. unless something major breaks. And there is the Gretzky tournament coming up, formerly the Hlinka tournament in August for those who want a little hockey and more in the summertime. So
hey,
have yourselves
on our way out, just wanted to give a quick shout out to Jeff Marek. The hockey media world is a small one.
Yes.
We've enjoyed the 32 Thoughts podcast over the last few years, and this business can be ruthless at times. So sending our best to Jeff, and excited to see where he lands next.
Talented dude. He'll only be out out as long as he wants to be, is the way I would word it. He would have lots of options to get back in for sure. So him and I exchanged the few messages on the weekend, and yeah, he's doing well. So yeah, we'll miss him, and well, I don't expect that we'll miss him very long. So that'll be great. Have a good one. That's another edition of the Rundown brought to you by Bet365. Have yourselves a great off season.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.